All right, we're going to continue with our two-track method. And that is, one part will be oral, and then I'll do something totally different in the handouts later on so that we don't just get a duplicate of everything. And it's a very good practice to do two different things at the same time. All right. We're looking at the first examples of the last kind of profiles, the focus profiles. We're going to take the first 8 charts, and we're going to try and apply it. So looking first with the Jay Gould chart, we find that in terms of the agreement, the sun is positive, the moon is positive, and the ascendant is positive. And if we go into detail, we find that the sun is air, the moon is air, and the ascendant is air. And if we go even further into detail, the ruler of the ascendant is in air and almost within orb of the ascendant itself. So then we find that we have somebody here that has no blockages, at least in the rough, in terms of being able to focus from within out or from without back in. Even with the 12th house, there is so much agreement that it's very hard to break up that much agreement. The triple or the quadruple air indicates that what he puts in or what he takes in or what he puts out is always done in a very organized way. Air and earth are the real organizing elements. The fact that it is Gemini for the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant and the sun indicates that what he cares about are facts. Gemini wants facts, and it's not interested in anything but facts. So that so that what he sees in the external world is just exactly what he, the spirit deep within, wants. And that is a few simple facts. That that Mercury is in the first house shows that in either the externalization process or the internalization process, he's thinking on the fly. What is in the first house is what you do along the way. And so along the way, he is active. The fact that the moon is in Libra and that all of the other primary focus elements are in Gemini shows that he uses both ways of dealing with knowledge. Gemini does things by contrast because of the polarization, and Libra, with the Venusian quality, does things by comparison. So by comparison, you see what is like what. Grab one of the programs, and so you can find out when you're on Saturday. Now, if total psychic health depended on the ability to get things out clearly or to get things in clearly, he would be healthy. When we get into the details of the chart, we'll see that there are other difficulties, but it's very, very good that he can externalize and internalize without any problems. The only thing is that people who have all of the major components, sun, moon, and ascendant, that focus the outer, the middle, and the inner person, all in the same element, there's too much specialization often. And the specialization with air is that it lives in a paper world, or it lives in a world of thoughts and not necessarily in a sensible world that you can touch. So that's the kind of specialization that he has. The Aries signs indicate that he's probably very flexible, very adaptable, but one of the things about the Aries signs is that they are not very robust. So you get the quality that whether he is externalizing or internalizing, it's not something like a tractor. It's something more that's something lithe and light that can bring things through in a light way, but not necessarily something durable. All right? Looking at the last test, which is the phase test, the way I do that is I look at the position of the moon relative to the sun. He's born approximately a day after the first trine. And the first trine is the accomplishment trine. If the new moon indicates a new impulse, when you get that impulse externalized, that's like the first trine. So the fact that it is between the near the ascendant and the fifth house shows that there really is a giving or a playing kind of quality. As serious as he was and as nervous as he was, he really played the market. To him, it was utterly fascinating and a game to him. This is somebody that over a century ago made something like $120 million on the stock market by doing very illegal things. It's the first chart on there, the Jay Gould chart. So at the first trine is when things are accomplished and where things are fulfilled. And the day after the first trine, it's already past the peak of accomplishment or of fulfillment or of having carried it out. And the day after the first trine of the sun and the moon is something like picking raspberries that are a little bit past their highest ripeness. When you deal with raspberries, they come on slowly. At first, there's just a few ripe ones, and some of them you have to pull real hard to get them off. But in full ripeness, everywhere you look, there's raspberries, and you can pull them off. But when you're just past that stage, there are less there, and there are no more coming. And when you try to grab them, sometimes they fall off, or when you do grab them, they mush in your hand. And so this stage of the cycle then is just past the perfect ripeness of raspberries. There's so much happening, and it's so easy that things are falling to the ground, and you can't take care of all of the opportunities. And so one day past the first trine has that type of quality about it. So this is somebody that you might say then, if you take that picture and you put it in your consciousness, this is somebody who came to birth to focus his life at a stage of the cycle when it was easy pickings. So you can see that this is a very specialized chart, and it's an easy pickings chart. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is the Helen Keller chart. And we run into another specialist with Helen Keller. The sun is in a negative sign, the moon is in a negative sign, and the ascendant is in a negative sign, and all three are water. This is an excellent follow-up to the Jay Gould chart. So again, we have an excellent flow, because these are the primary ingredients from the outer world to the inmost world. So when they're all in the same element, it says that it's really easy for it to flow. In the Gould chart, everything was in positive signs. And for him, reality was probably in the outer world. He looked to objects. He looked to make money. Perforce, because Helen Keller was both deaf and blind, the greater reality was in the inner world. So she was much more introversive than extroversive, and so that goes right along. That's not the reason, but it goes right along with the fact that she's deaf-blind, that she has all watery signs which are introversive in that nature. So there is the fact that both the sun and the moon are in retreat houses. The sun is in the 8th house, the moon is in the 4th house, and both of those are houses where somebody's likely to withdraw, so that indicates even more of an inward kind of nature that she has. The total agreement then is very water. She's not looking for the facts, because everything is water. What she's looking for is the feel of things. The watery signs are the feeler signs. And so that's what she's looking for. She could care less about data or anything like that. And she doesn't want an artificial world. She wants a world that she can feel, not necessarily tactilely, but that too, but that she can feel emotionally. In her case, things are a little bit different than the Jay Gould, because the sun is in Cancer, the moon is in Pisces, and the ascendant is in Scorpio, meaning to say that she has one foot on each of the legs of the watery triplicity. And therefore, when she's looking at water, she's not just looking at one or two parts of it, she's looking at it from every point of view. And there's much more likely to be stability in that. When we look at the stage test, in her case, she has the second trine of the sun and the moon, and plus a day. She's just past the perfection of that. Now, the second trine of the sun and the moon is like looking at a poem that you wrote a long time ago, or looking at a poem as though somebody else were reading it. In the act of writing that poem or in creating something, you had an idea you were trying to get out, and you focused on getting that out. But the spirit is much more than that, and in the creative conception, it has much more that it wants to say, and it actually goes into the poem. But when you go back and look, then you can see that it's there. So after the full moon, in the second stage, or the second phase of the lunation cycle, when you come to that second trine, what's happening is the moon is already shrinking. And it's shrinking because it's giving its light back to the sun. And so what was built in the first stage, when you start looking at it from the other person's point of view, after that first inconjunct, on the way back, things start deteriorating. So when the second trine is, you're abstracting principles out of what you've done, and you're taking whole principles. At the second square, the full structure is removed. But so she's in between the second trine and the second square, and at that phase in the moon cycle, what happens is she's abstracting, but it's an overdone type of process. That the dissolution is becoming so much that it's hard to keep the principles together. And so that she's harvesting and drawing out as much as she can. You can look at that with her life, that being born in that stage of the cycle, she's born when the world was at that moment, in the moon cycle, it was in a state where things were being generally absorbed. So what she wants to do is this whole life, she wants to absorb as much as she can so that in her next life, she'll have a lot of material. Yeah.
How are you determining first trine, second trine? Is that something you've talked about?
Yes. No, we've been talking about that for weeks. The first trine is the one that when the shortest distance between the sun and the moon is forward in the zodiac. The second trine is when the shortest distance from the sun to the moon is backward in the zodiac. The first trine is in the waxing moon. The second trine is in the waning moon. Okay. So there's quite a bit of inwardness in this chart. You can say to some extent that she is sort of rebuilding. And by rebuilding, I don't mean like remodeling. It's sort of like taking the experiences and finding the structure of them in the ideas or in the qualities that are in the spirit where the creative work is done in the first place. All right. We're probably taking too much time. This is called the race. If I had known she was going to be here, I would have had her give the class tonight. She would give it all in French. we would be duly impressed, and you could hold your nose in the air, and we would all be impressed. All right, we're looking at the chart of Mohan Gandhi. Here we run into the first difficulty. The sun is positive, the moon is positive, but the ascendant is negative. So if the sun represents self, the self is willing. If the moon represents everything between the self and the body, which we're calling, in that terrible usage of the word, soul nature, that's able and that's positive. But when things get to the ascendant says no. So we have, with the sun, and especially in the 12th house, he's got loving, positive attitudes and solutions to world problems. And with the moon in Leo, he can sustain the love and try to externalize things. But when he gets to his personality, he's stubborn. And he's non-cooperative. He tried to have a philosophy that was love, but quite a bit of the effectiveness of his philosophy was non-cooperation. Yeah, it's true. He writes that by his own word. So it resists all of this expression, even though in the spirit he intends it. You know, it's like Paul in the Bible when he says, "The good that I would that I do, that do I not. But that which I would not, that do I." And so, like, he's got all of these good ideas inwardly, but he never gets, he has a hard time externalizing them. If he had a thoroughly agreed chart, it would have been much easier. Now, if you look at things going the other way around, Scorpio, besides seeing sex everywhere in the world, Gandhi saw filth everywhere in the world. Every time that there was a convention, he got down and cleaned toilets, and he wanted everybody else to clean toilets. What he was aware of in the external world was filth. I'm just doing that as a joke, but it's true. But he sees problems. Scorpio always sees problems in the world. But when he internalizes them, what happens is the spirit and the soul nature see, oh, isn't this all lovely? Isn't this all pretty? And so even though there's a keen awareness of difficulties in the external world, when it gets turned inward, it takes on the rose-colored glasses. Outside in the world, he sees clear about it. In either case, whether you're working from without in or whether you're working from within out, there's frustration. This is what happens when you have not agreement, especially at one of the terminal points. If the ascendant or if the sun is not in agreement with the other two members, then you have that kind of frustration. He tried to do loving things only to see them sometimes dissolve into riots, and that was very hard for him. The British never understood him spiritually at all. They never understood what he was talking about, so they just saw him as a troublemaker. They saw him as somebody who was a rabble-rouser that stirred up all the people. Obviously, with the sun in Libra, he sees that he intends love. This is something that we see every day. We see people that inwardly intend to be loving, but they just sometimes have very irascible personalities, and it doesn't come off that way. They can't all have Virgo rising that look like nice guys. There's another part of this. The Libra represents love. Pure human for human love. Leo represents loving affection. It's very demonstrative. But Scorpio rules sex. So this proved to be a huge frustration to him also. That even though he was tried to be a very loving man, he saw things sexually outside. So in some ways, he started his sexual life by his own thing. I think he started his sexual life somewhere around age 12 or something like that. And it was a problem to him almost throughout life, and parts of him were adolescent throughout life. All right, let's look at the phase test. And the phase test is that he is past the second sextile. We looked at the second trine just a few moments ago, and we saw that the second trine abstracts principles. When it comes to the second square, then there is a much faster destruction, and all of the basic structural elements. The square represents structural elements. Everything is built on the square. And when the square is pulled out, then things start to dissolve really fast. So that the second sextile is very synthetic. It's so universalized there aren't even principles. It just sees similarities. It's so, like everything is so one-like that you can unify things, and you don't have to unify on the basis of principles. You can say it's something like the other. And so he's just past that, and that's when things are really starting to collapse. At the second inconjunct, things in fact do collapse. The inconjuncts the semi-sextiles represent changes of state. The first semi-sextile represents consolidation, and at the very end of the sextile, at the end of the cycle, the second semi-sextile represents collapse. When the moon is collapsing back into the sun, and it's very hard to get anything accomplished at that time. That is called a boon moon, I believe it is. I'm not sure. But he's just before that period. So his things are universalizing, and they're universalizing so fast, the dissolution process happens so fast, it's hard to control it. And that's exactly what's happening. He's trying to break up conditions in the world. And he's trying to break up some things that have been around for a long time. And when the breakup happens, it happens faster than he can control it. So he happened to be a very good universalizer. I think that the country of India and of Pakistan would both be much better off if they had listened to his universalizing principles in the first place. So he doesn't deal with particular universals. That's somebody like the Platonists would do that, or the Vedantins would do something like that, but Gandhi doesn't do that. All right, we're at the halfway point. How far are we? Oh, we're doing along just fine. We'll be done in 45 minutes tonight. We go to the Isadora Duncan chart. The sun is positive. The moon is positive, and the ascendant is positive. Should be the next chart up. Oh, hers are in alphabetical order. You changed the order. Oh, okay. It's Isadora Duncan. It's Aries rising and Sun in Gemini. Isadora Duncan spent a lot of time in France. You know that. They probably even made statues over there because she was a good friend of Rodin's. Okay. So we have a chart that is in all positives, and everything is in agreement. And it's another one of those Gemini charts. And because there's so much associated with the ascendant, the moon and ascendant are both in the east This is somebody, again, that is an externalizing person. And usually when all three of the major positionings are positive, it usually is an externalizing person. So if we look at his profile in detail, it's something like the Gandhi and something unlike the Gandhi. Aries and Gemini, Sun position and Moon and Ascendant positions, those two signs, Aries and Gemini, are very versatile. So we can see that this is a chart that is intended for versatility. Gemini is not quite as vigorous and as robust as Aries. So if you think about the creative process, she gets quick, fleeting, like creative thoughts in the Sun, and when she goes to externalize them through the soul nature and into the physical body, they pick up steam. So that what starts out as a very light, flighty little thing, by the time it gets out, it's getting out with real gusto, with a lot of enthusiasm. So it's somebody that is deft and very deft in the thinking, unlike your instructor who is very daft in his thinking. But somebody who is very vigorous in action. This chart, when you think about that kind of externalization process, I don't know if any of you were ice skaters or have been around ice skating, but when you're kids and you go ice skating, there is a thing that is called crack the whip. And with crack the whip, one person is the leader, and they're holding arm after arm until there's a big string of people. And as the leader makes a turn, it builds up momentum so that the person on the outside gets spun way out. So often they let go and it just goes zoom, going way out. And so something like that, this is like a crack the whip chart. That's a very good picture if you can use it in other charts. The moon is in the 12th house, and that often slows things down. But it's right before the ascendant, not quite conjoining it, but right before the ascendant. And I think the way she did this with her dance work, you can still get films. I don't know if you can get them in video, but you can still get films of her dance work. But when she made motions, symbolic motions, express something, she didn't express the whole thing. She didn't put it out in complete detail. It was almost like there was always a little promise that there's going to be something more following up behind. And when the moon is right off the ascendant in the 12th house like that, that's that quality of a promise that something more is just beneath the surface and it's just about to come out. All right. This is like the Gandhi chart again. It's with the stage. This is somebody that has the second sextile, and it's again past the second sextile. Only she doesn't have the frustration. Now, Isadora Duncan was aware that she was at the end of an era and that there needed to be something new. It was an end of the era of dance as she saw it, and there had to be a new form of dance. But she couldn't. She had the desire to do something new, but this phase of the moon, being the second sextile, wasn't good for actually accomplishing new foundation work. So what she did a lot of synthesizing, and she synthesized from things that were very incongruous. Grammar books and dancing, or classical Greek things and modern French culture. She synthesized all kinds of weird things, and she could make it work because she had that universalizing kind of quality. Again, she was synthesizing. It didn't have to be the exact same idea again. And the house positioning between the sun and the moon, the moon is in the 12th house, and the sun is in the 2nd house. The 12th house position is things from the immediate past. and she had this fascination for classical Greek things. And the sun is in the second house, so like she's trying to draw from classical times and consolidate, because the second house is consolidation or it is objectification. And so that's what she's trying to do, but because of the stage of the cycle, it's very difficult to do. It's again right before collapse. It's a really interesting combination between new and old cycles, because the stage of the cycle is old, but Gemini and Aries are new and fresh. And if you look at the sun and moon, they straddle the ascendant. One is in the 12th house indicating the past, and one is in the second house going toward the future, consolidating in the future. So this is sort of an awkward kind of chart in that regard, in that the things that she really wants to do, she cannot do because she's born in the wrong stage of the cycle. However, she couldn't do all the synthesis that she did do if she had been born in the stage of the cycle that she wanted to be born in. So you get some things and you can't get everything. That may be the only wise thing I say tonight. All right. Looking at Vincent's chart, probably the last one in yours, Vincent van Gogh. Here we run again into one of those frustration profiles. Sun is positive in Aries. The moon is positive in Sagittarius. And the ascendant is negative in Cancer. In some ways, it's not greatly different from the Gandhi chart, but it is different kinds of problems that he dealt with. As we have often said, Cancer likes pictures. It doesn't like to talk a lot. It just says, give me an image. Give me a picture. A picture is worth 1,000, how was it? A picture is worth 1,000 lens caps. Isn't that what it's? BC says a picture is worth 1,000 lens caps. Remember that? No. It's a very clever thing. So, what he sees in the world are pictures. He really was one of those people that would go around with his thumb like this, or he would always be framing things into pictures or setting. He had a perspective board that he'd carry around with him when he was going to draw or when he was going to paint. He's always seeing things in pictures. He writes in his own letters to his brother, he writes that he has the house around him filled with pictures. Not only from other painters, but any kind of photographs or lithographs or anything like that. He loves to have pictures around. So he likes seeing pictures as wholes. But as soon as he takes a picture in, and it gets into the soul nature, Sagittarius, especially there with Jupiter, woof, it gets expanded, and it gets abstracted. And the whole idea, he gets carried away with an inspirational idea, and everything gets expanded. And by the time things get all the way back into the sun in Aries, it's pure energy. It's no longer the picture. The picture has been greatly distorted, like what he's taken from the outer world, which is a cool kind of setting. When it gets expanded and inspired and it becomes just like a flame inward, it's something different has happened. This is because Cancer is the outer nature, and the moon represents the middle nature, going back and forth between everything. And the moon is in Sagittarius, which is very expansive, and it's together with Jupiter, which is very expansive. And so it takes the picture and it expands it to some kind of very broad idea. And from that broad idea, then the sun is in Aries, and it just catches a flame, and it gets a flaming inner spiritual impulse. When he tries to create inwardly, if you start with the sun from deep inside, he's enthused, and he's burning with inspiration, and that gets very much magnified again in the soul nature with the moon. But then when he tries to externalize it, it has been magnified so much that it gets distorted. And what he has seen inwardly in his inspiration is not what he can get out externally. His earlier work, if you look at, there's a wonderful website that has a chronology of all of his paintings that you can sit there and you can load painting after painting. There must be about 200 and some paintings, I would believe. And you can follow it year by year by year. And his earlier work is cool and dark. It's like the ascendant. He was spending all this time teaching himself how to draw. And as he progressed on, it became more like his inner nature. So that by the time that you get to the latter works, when he was having psychological difficulties, he's so filled with energy that everything is distorted with energy, and he's making black lines around all the figures to hold it in, because he can't hold in what he's got in his soul. It wants to come bursting out, and his whole nature wants to tear apart. And that's the kind of that's the kind of agreement. Inwardly, he's very bright. He's very colorful. He's radiant with energy, but he couldn't externalize it. Obviously, this is somebody that's frustrated, because what he sees with the external eye isn't what he sees with the internal eye, and what he sees with the internal eye and tries to externalize, neither of them match each other. So that's terribly frustrating. Did it bother him? I don't think so. I think he just was so enthused and he was so carried away that the frustration of it, well, maybe this one didn't work, but the next one will. And he was so much in love with nature that the next setting down the road would be just a new inspiration. He didn't have to worry about it. The enthusiasm could override any kind of frustration that he had in his character. All right. Looking at the phase, yes. All right. Looking at the phase test, he is in the second trine, and again, he's a day after it. And what we see here is very accurate to his life. It's amazing how astrology, how accurate it is, and how many details and how many great things you can discover. So this is an abstracting trine. But it wasn't so abstracting that it was completely non-representative. Because if it were like the second sextile, things would be so synthetic that it wouldn't be representative. So he still has the representation, but he's abstracting from nature. He's not doing something totally different from it. So it's beyond the culmination. So he's getting an idea, but it's a day past it already, but the idea is starting to get a little vague. It's, things are in a state of deterioration. It isn't like in crystal clear as when you first abstract it out of the material stuff. What is interesting about this character is that as abstract as he is, his abstractions are not purely mental. Fire and water are not mentalist signs. That belongs to Gemini, to the Aries signs, or sometimes even the Earth signs. Fire and water are elementally fundamental. Water will wash anything, even the hardest epoxy cement. If you put water on it long enough, or wash it long enough, you'll wash it away. And fire just burns and tries to burn up everything. Abstract ideas can be ideas of feeling. They can be ideas of spirit. And it is those kinds of things that he had his abstractions from, and not just mental abstractions, but they were abstractions of the stuff that made up the world. So when we hear the word abstraction, we often think of something mental, but there are ideas about emotions. And those aren't mental ideas about emotions. Those are just universal ideas about the stuff of emotions, and even about the form of things that aren't really mental. Yes? Yes.
If this
A day earlier?
A day earlier.
A day earlier, his ideas would have been more clear. Yes. No, the more, I don't like the word concrete. I like the word more clear. Yeah.
So the fact that it's looking toward the square, the last square,
yes,
that has more of this destructive value to it.
Yes.
Put things in clarity.
Yes. Yeah. The second square is like pulling out all the props, and everything goes boom. Everything starts tumbling down much faster after that. But if his perception as well as his ideation process was fuzzy. He may have been somebody with, in modern terms, what they call fuzzy logic. So like his ideas are not crystal clear. They're a little bit past that. He gets the universal idea, but he's so interested in how that idea tapers off into the light. You know, like if you have an object, the relationship between the object and the world around it, there's always a tapering effect. It's only, you know, like when we're really clear and in focus, like I can see like the edge of your shirt. It isn't a black line, but I can see a distinct edge and see what is behind it. But when things get, when there's a lot of light, if we took all of these lights in the room here and focused them on you, it would be much more difficult to see because, it's a tapering effect. It phases off. And so that's what he does. He has abstract ideas. And he has abstract ideas of spirit and abstract ideas of feeling. He's not stupid, and he certainly is capable of mental abstraction as well, but it is from feeling and from light and from color that he wants to abstract. He doesn't care that much about the particulars. All right. Eleanor. It's too bad. I've read 2 biographies of Eleanor, and none of them actually get into her inner nature. Biographies are frustrating in the first place for that very reason, but for an astrologer, they're especially frustrating. So what we're going to be doing is more pure astrology, less biography when we talk about this. Looking at the agreement, this is a new kind of agreement. The sun is positive in Libra. The moon is negative in Cancer. And the ascendant is positive in Sagittarius. So, what she has a high spiritual purpose, and she starts out with simple ideas. But then things hit the soul nature, and it gets complicated. You know how it is when you start with something really simple that you want to do, and then when you try to work it out, my goodness, there are piles and piles of thoughts like, how am I going to do this? And you start fussing over things. Everything's, there are distractions, and there are so many different options. And so there is something that is very inefficient when the soul nature is negative and the body nature and the spirit nature are positive. It can't, what's outward is agreeable to her, and in spirit that's agreeable to her, but in that invisible in-between, that is where things become complicated. It's very hard to cut through all of that. It sometimes takes an act of will, and you just have to force yourself through that. Now, this doesn't mean that she didn't accomplish anything, because she accomplished quite a lot. The world forced her to accomplish things. But was she comfortable? No. She wasn't comfortable because she was always fretting. That Cancerian moon is always wanting to maternally protect things and incubate them and things like that. Sometimes the Cancer moon is like a chicken that doesn't want its eggs to hatch. It just wants to sit on them forever and ever. Keep it close to home. So it's this thing to say that in her soul nature, she was shy, she was indecisive, and she was vacillatory, and conveying sense information. The moon in Cancer, compared to the positive signs, is, like water is excitable, especially cardinal water, which is what Cancer is. And so it's excitable, and then things don't get through right to keep things in a stable state. Looking at the stage test, this is the first chart we run into that actually is in orbit between the sun and the moon. This is a second square, and it's separating. And there's another way we can look at the second square. The second square is a negative limits square. A positive limits square is like the first square. If you take a car or a motorcycle or whatever, and you go to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, it's smooth, it's perfectly level, it's been leveled by the earth, the melting water and everything. And a positive limit of an automobile is how fast it can go. So they take an automobile out there and they drive as fast as it goes, and it can't go any faster. That's its positive limit. It's as far as it can go. A negative limit is when you go around a corner, it's as fast as you can go going around the corner, and if you go any faster, you crack up or you destroy. There's a negative limit that says, much as you would like to, if you try to carry this further, you're going to run into trouble. And this is a negative limits square that she has. It's sort of like with the Sagittarius rising, it knows no bounds. It would get enthused and would want to carry things further and further and further, but she's always on the edge of saying, I can't carry this any further because something is going to go wrong. And again, with that moon being in Cancer, there's a fretful kind of quality. So all of her life, she has this quality of, oops, I can't go any further without getting into trouble. Now, she was a very strong, positive woman, but she was raised in, I think about third or fourth generation Dutch society in New York. And here she was in one of the most powerful families in New York, and she was like one of had the debutante ball. She did all of that. And here she was married to the president, and if she went too far with this or with that, it would be scandalous. So you look at the 7th and the 10th house positions of the sun and moon, the destructive phase in there, there's always the threat of scandal, if not actual scandal. And so that's what she had hanging over her head all the time. So it's sort of like a feeling that things could inevitably go wrong, and she had to be cautious of it all the while. She was raised really strictly, and she always had those negative limits. You daren't do this or things will go wrong.
Could it be considered a sensitivity?
Yes. Because she didn't. The reason I brought out this side of the second square is because it wasn't just outright a second square for her, because she would have been in one scandal after another after another. The only scandal that I know of Eleanor Roosevelt is because my father was a Republican in those days, but he became a Democrat by the time he died, and he hated Eleanor Roosevelt. And there was no reason for it, but he just hated her because but she never really had any scandals. We'll talk about a lot of modern writers tend to think that she was a lesbian, but we'll talk about those when we get deeper into the analysis. In fact, we have to make a note about this because there are factors in this chart that are very strong that will come out in the detailed analysis that are enough to override the general kind of thing that we're doing right now. So this is going to have to be modified. We're just looking at the generals. But no, she never let it become destructive, but she did have that, like I can't do this or it's going to be trouble. Yes?
The fact that the sun's in the 12th house, which would normally be Capricorn's place?
No, Pisces place. Oh, well,
10th house.
10th house would be Capricorn's place, yes.
Does that make it more destructive here?
Yes, because that is the place of the second square relative to the ascendant. She was very well aware of that, but it wasn't necessarily more destructive for her. Not that I can see from what I've read of her life. Now these two profiles, the agreement profile and the stage profile, they complement each other. And they give a pretty accurate general focus of her life. She is upsettable and excitable. Even though inwardly she has poise and outwardly she has graciousness, she's upsettable and excitable, and in all of those circumstances she never was comfortable. And it does show that she has a difficulty carrying things out because she's always tippy-toeing around the next thing that's going to be a disaster. Okay. Well, we've only done 15 minutes. We're already at the 6th chart. Crazy. Crazy horse. Now, what I do in the handouts is very different for Crazy Horse because I'm fascinated. This is the first time I've worked with horoscopes that are completely different culturally. Because Native American culture was very different from our culture. And I think she's got it. You got Crazy Horse?
Yeah, but I think that chart might be wrong.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it's
There are two Crazy Horses. Oh, you still got the old one in there.
I think I still have the old one. Look at his.
Here, borrow this one for a second. Oh, okay. All right. Looking at the agreement. The sun is negative in Taurus. The moon is negative in Cancer. And the ascendant is negative in Cancer. This is, again, a very good agreement. And it is most likely to be an introversive stream of consciousness that is favored over the extroversive. This is very good, especially with Cancer rising, to be introversive like this in nature settings. So he was probably very typical of his society in that he could see things in nature and get the picture of nature and internalize it. It would be very difficult if you were a completely extroversive person and your continuance, your survival, depended on how well you read nature. But that wasn't the case with him. Now, there's another aspect that is culturally consistent besides being in touch with nature. And when we talk about the moon being the indicator of soul, it's conjoined to the ascendant. Now, the moon conjoined the ascendant has a wanderlust. And the Plains Indians, like most of the Indians in the United States, were nomadic. And so, not only was he in touch with nature, but he was able to go along with the flow of nature and live in a nomadic kind of existence and do so with complete harmony. Cancer and Taurus are probably the two most defensive signs of the zodiac. So this unified agreement of Sun, Moon, and Ascendant between Taurus and Cancer shows that he was, even though he was a warrior, he was a defensive warrior. The most he would do would be counterattack. His position in society was something like a defender. And there were two people that were, see, he wasn't a chief. He wasn't hereditary in that way as to being a chief, but there were two people that were chosen, and as long as they lived, or as long in their younger years, they were chosen as being defenders. And he was a person that was chosen in such a place. Even having the sun conjoin Mars, showing a pretty strong arm kind of consciousness that he has, it isn't something that he would be offensive and charge out there and say, we've got to get rid of all of these white people. It indicates more likely that he would counterattack. Who was it? Joe Louis? What was Joe Louis? Joe Louis was a counterpuncher. He wasn't a lead puncher, and I think he had something not too dissimilar from this. So his perceptiveness and his steadiness in spirit, the fact that he could be steady and perceptive, is the big part of the reason why he was as successful as he was. Now, this is very unusual when we get to the stage test. It's after the first semi-sextile, but it hasn't quite gotten to the first sextile yet. Now, that makes this very unusual, because the sun is young and vigorous. And it's just about to show a new face to the world, but it isn't quite there yet. So what this represents in the face of the other things, like the sun being conjoined to Mars, this shows him as being an up-and-coming young Turk, but not somebody that was going to be an accepted, or somebody that was going to be seen out in the world as being great, or that this is the new thing to come, because it's right before the sextile. And the first sextile is the first really major aspect that you can see something. So he's a young Turk, that he's not what they would call a made man yet. So in this regard, he's probably not completely harmonious with his society, because his society is old, not by chronological age, but the nomadic Plains Indians were a very old society, having gone on for hundreds of years, and here you have a young Turk. So he was no doubt, in some regards, considered just a little bit too much of an upstart. Having the moon conjoin the ascendants indicates again, almost like it did in the Isadora Duncan chart, this is somebody that's likely to burst out from ambuscade at almost any moment. It's a big surprise kind of thing. It's again always having that, look out, here it's coming, but you don't know exactly from when or where. He has to defer to the chiefs and to the elders and the people like that. But this shows that he's chafing. He has to hold himself in a little bit. In general, the agreement is very good. It's great for somebody having a vigorous kind of existence. He's probably so much of a nomad that being born in that phase of the cycle, he'd probably move the gang all the time if he could do it, rather than just where the buffalo were moving. He's that much vigorous. And look at that. We're already at the last chart. What? Yes, we're only doing half of it. You're doing the second half over summer. And in fall, I'm going to call on you first, because Heidi may be delivered by then, and we can't rely on Heidi for having her. But you can think about working on that next assignment. It's like a slow, quiet building process. All right. Louisa May Alcott. This is something like a Vincent chart again. The sun is positive in Sagittarius, a fiery sign. The moon is positive in an Aries sign, Aquarius. And the ascendant is negative in Virgo. And then looking in that first house, Saturn is in the first house, which adds to that negativity. Now, without a doubt, Sagittarius and Aquarius are the two most expansively idealistic signs in the zodiac. They are also the two most universalistic signs in the zodiac. And when you put that together with Virgo, which is an ascendant that tends to be petty, you can see what kind of frustration that there is. There are all these high, noble impulses to do good and to do all these positive things in her sun, and her spirit, and in her soul nature. But when it comes to getting things out to literary perfection, where things have to be condensed and concentrated and exactly right, Saturn just says, hey, no matter how idealistic you are, this is the way it has to be, and it has to be this way right down to the last detail. So things are slower than she wants. Having things in universalistic signs like that, she gets the idea right away. And she would love to float away in La La Land if she could, but she has this need to communicate, and in order to do that, she has to face things that she doesn't like. I tried getting a soul picture of it, and the soul picture I get isn't very pretty, but it's sort of like when a bird flies into a window, and it picks itself up and it's all right, but it can still fly again, but there are just some things in the world that are very limiting, and having Saturn in the first house is like that. You have a question, Jerry?
Yeah, I was just wondering if with Saturn in the first house and Mercury, and it squared Mercury the way it was she browbeat them, or was held back?
I think she writes a lot about young people in their circumstances relative to old people. And I think the way Saturn worked in the first house is that she was brought up with people that were significantly older, and she was keenly aware of that. And in her writings, there is a tendency both to revere the older people, but somehow you sense underneath it all that, to some extent that the kids were like underlings. There was that kind of a feeling there. If you look at things going inward, she's very much aware of the hardships that are in the world. She's writing about Pennsylvania at a very early time in our country when people were living on farms and there was a lot of illnesses that there were no. This is way before the Civil War, and more people in the Civil War died from lack of medical treatment and from sicknesses and such than died from battle wounds. And so we're dealing with a very primitive time, and so she's aware of all of those kinds of limitations, and at the same time, as much as she's aware of how hard the world is and how dark it is, she gets writing, and when she gets writing, it's la-di-da-di-da, everything is happy, and she's that kind of way. All right. She is just past the first sextile. She's about 2 or 3 days later in the lunation cycle from Crazy Horse. So the first sextile is sort of like beginner's luck, or when you show your first brilliance, and, like you've shown your first stuff, it's like when a writer comes out with their first novel, they're looking for the second one to see whether this is a one-story person or whether it's somebody that's going to be able to continue on. And so she's at a place in the cycle where the stage of the moon is such that it has shown itself, it has objectified something, and but the real hard consolidation that comes from the first square where things really get solidified, that hasn't happened yet. So what I get is with the putting together the sign positionings a little bit with the stage of the cycle, it's effervescence. It's sort of like a can of soda that has been opened, but it isn't when it's opened and it's real fizzy, but it's stood for a while. It's not stale yet, but it's not at its height of fizziness, which would be like the first sextile. And so it's somewhere, so that the fizziness is wearing off, and some of that quality is there. So it represents a young, spirited person, and it's almost like somebody who's leaving adolescence to take on the hardships of life. There still is all of the joy of childhood that is there, but the innocence of childhood is passing away, and all of the knowledge of the hardships of adult life aren't there. And that's the stage of society that she was in. That's the stage of soul that she was in, and it shows a pretty good focus. And putting the two tests together, both of them are talking about imminent hardship. That she was sort of like in a positive place, but sort of like bracing herself. And that's the kind of stance that that it all has. So it's consolidating, and it's moving toward something very, very hard and difficult. All right. That's as much as we do. This is a completely different version. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah, I have all these people coming starting tomorrow. She's here already. So I have all these people coming into town, so I couldn't put a whole lot of time in. This is enough anyway to want to... All right. The people around here think that I talk a lot. They think I talk too much. But I just tell them that their ascendants are out of focus and they're not getting the facts right. Richardian.